I woke up with a sack over my head and rope biting into my wrists, and the first thought that crossed my mind wasn't who kidnapped me. It was, great, now I'm going to be late for the Zhou family dinner. That should tell you everything you need to know about how used to chaos I already was. My name is Chen Mo. My father runs the second largest logistics company in the city. The largest belongs to the Zhou family, our rivals in everything from shipping contracts to who gets the best table at the Lunar New Year gala. For as long as I can remember, Zhou has been a curse word in my household. My father lost 3 major contracts to Old Man Zhou in a single year, and ever since our two families have circled each other like sharks smelling blood in the water. So when the sack came off my head and I found myself staring at Zhou Xinyi, the younger sister of my supposed arch-enemy Zhou Rui, sitting across from me in what looked suspiciously like a very expensive, very empty warehouse loft, my first reaction wasn't fear, it was confusion. "You," I said, "are entirely too small to be kidnapping anyone." Zhou Xinyi crossed her arms. She was maybe 5'2", wearing a cropped leather jacket that probably cost more than my car payment, and glaring at me like I'd personally insulted her ancestors. "I am extremely capable of kidnapping someone," she snapped. "You're just an easy target." I walked out of a coffee shop. 2 men in suits grabbed me. "That's not exactly a skill issue on my part." She ignored that, which, fair. I looked around, floor-to-ceiling windows, exposed brick, a leather office chair that I was currently zip-tied to, which felt like an oddly specific choice for a kidnapping. Somewhere below us I could hear the low hum of a generator and, absurdly, what sounded like someone practicing scales on a piano. "Is that a piano?" I asked. "Do you kidnap people to a soundtrack?" "That's the building manager's daughter. She practices every evening. It's none of your business." "Everything about this evening is now my business, Xinyi. I'm the one tied to a chair." Her jaw tightened at the sound of her own name in my mouth, like she hadn't expected me to know it, even though our families had been circling each other for a decade. I knew exactly who she was. Everyone who'd ever sat through a Zhou Chen negotiation knew the younger daughter. Sharper tongued than her sister, less patient, twice as stubborn, according to my father, who called her the difficult one, with something that sounded suspiciously like respect. Here's what I didn't know yet, sitting there with my wrist still faintly red from the rope. Zhou Xinyi hadn't kidnapped me because she hated me. She'd kidnapped me because of her sister. Let me back up. Zhou Ru, Xinyi's older sister, and the one my family actually had beef with, had been my rival since business school. We'd fought over the same internship, the same client accounts, the same everything for 6 years running. She was brilliant, terrifyingly composed, and treated me like a mildly annoying insect that occasionally scored a point against her. I hated her. I was also, if I'm being honest with the version of myself that existed before this whole mess started, a little bit obsessed with beating her. What I did not know was that Zhou Rui had, for the past several months, been in a very public, very photographed situationship with a hedge fund heir named Lu Cheng. Society pages loved them. Xinyi hated him. "He's using her," Xinyi told me later, pacing back and forth in front of the warehouse's floor-to-ceiling windows while I sat there, still zip-tied to a very comfortable leather office chair, because apparently even kidnappers have standards. "He's using her to get close to our father's shipping routes into the southern ports, and she won't listen to me because she thinks I'm jealous of her happiness." "Are you?" "That's not the point." It was extremely the point, but I decided not to push it, mostly because I still didn't understand why any of this involved me. Then she told me, and I want you to understand, I nearly laughed in her face. "My sister," Xinyi said, "has hated you since college. If she finds out I kidnapped her least favorite person on Earth, and that you and I are bonding, she'll drop everything to come save you. Out of spite, if nothing else. And once she's here, away from Lu Sheng, I can show her the financial records that prove what he's really after. So I'm bait. You're bait." I should have been furious. Genuinely, I should have called the police the second these people gave me my phone back. But there was something about the absolute unhinged confidence in her plan, the sheer audacity of "I will kidnap my sister's enemy to make her jealous enough to notice me," that made me actually curious how this was going to play out. Also, if I'm being completely honest, Zhou Xinyi was extremely attractive when she was furious, and I have never claimed to have good judgment under those circumstances. "Fine," I said, "I'll play along, but I want good coffee, not this instant garbage, and I want my phone back so I can text my assistant that I'm not dead." She stared at me for a long moment, like she hadn't expected me to agree so easily. "You're not going to fight this at all? Would it work if I did?" "No." "Then coffee." Good coffee. That was how I ended up spending the next 4 days as a very well-treated hostage in a Zhou family safe house, being fed better food than my own kitchen produced, while Zhou Xinyai orchestrated the single most chaotic revenge/jealousy scheme I had ever witnessed in my life. Day 1 was mostly logistics. She untied my hands during meals and retied them after. Loosely, I noticed, loose enough that I could have slipped out if I'd actually wanted to, which told me something about her that she probably didn't intend to reveal so early. She brought me a laptop with the Wi-Fi disabled so I could look busy, and gave my assistant a pre-written text to send from my phone. Gone for a work retreat, unreachable for a few days, don't panic. My assistant, bless her, didn't panic. My father, predictably, didn't even notice I was gone, which was either a relief or deeply insulting depending on how I chose to feel about it. Your family doesn't check on you much, Sinyi observed on the first night, setting down a tray of food she'd clearly not made. This one was catered, stiff and formal. The kind of meal you serve someone you don't know what to do with yet. My family checks on the company. I happen to work there. She didn't respond to that, but something in her expression shifted, like she'd filed the information away somewhere she hadn't meant to build a folder for. There was a guard posted at the bottom of the stairs. A broad, silent man named Dahai, who I later learned had worked for the Zhou family since Sinyi was a child and would apparently do anything she asked without question, which explained a great deal about how a 26-year-old woman had managed to pull off an actual kidnapping without her father noticing for 3 full days. Dahai brought me a spare phone charger on day 1 without being asked, and refused to make eye contact the entire time, like he was actively trying not to have an opinion about any of this. Does he approve? I asked Xinyai that night, nodding toward the stairwell. Dahai doesn't approve or disapprove. Dahai does what I tell him and prays my father never asks him direct questions under oath. Comforting. Here's the part where it stopped being funny to me and started being something else. On the second night, Jinyi came up to the loft with 2 bowls of noodles and sat across from me at the little folding table like this was the most normal thing in the world. She didn't talk much at first, just ate, glanced at me, looked away when I caught her looking. You didn't have to make it yourself, I said, gesturing at the noodles, which were objectively better than anything her family's private chef could have thrown together. Isn't kidnapping supposed to come with hired help? The staff can't know you're here, too many loose ends. She paused. Also, I like cooking, don't make it weird. I'm zip-tied to a chair. Everything about this is already weird. She almost smiled. Almost. And that almost smile did something to my chest that I chose to aggressively ignore. We talked more than either of us probably intended to that night. She asked why I still worked for my father's company when it was obvious, to her apparently, though not to me until she said it, that I hated the shipping industry and had only ever gone into it because it was expected of me. I asked her why she'd spent 6 years listening to her sister complain about me without ever once meeting me herself. She said she'd been avoiding it on purpose because she'd built up such a vivid, irritating picture of that insufferable Chen Mo in her head from Rui's stories that she was afraid the real version would either confirm it and ruin nothing, or contradict it and ruin everything. Which one is it? I asked, now that you've met the real version. She didn't answer that one. She just took my empty bowl and left. A little too fast, and I sat there in my chair grinning like an idiot at absolutely nothing. What I didn't know, what the viewer gets to know before I do, because that's just how these things work, was that Jinyi's scheme had a crack in it from the very beginning. She told herself this was purely strategic, purely about protecting her sister from a manipulative hedge fund shark. But every time she came up those stairs with food, every time she accidentally lingered a little too long untying my hands so I could eat, every time she picked a fight with me about something completely unrelated just to keep talking to me longer, that wasn't strategy. That was a girl who had spent years hearing her sister talk about that insufferable Chen Mo, and had built an entire imaginary rivalry with someone she'd never even properly met, only to discover, 4 days into an ill-advised kidnapping, that the real thing was infinitely more interesting than the idea of it. She would have died before admitting that. That same night, downstairs, out of my earshot but not out of the stories, Xini sat alone at the kitchen counter with her laptop open to the Lu Cheng Shell Company files, supposedly reviewing evidence. She wasn't reviewing evidence. She was staring at nothing, replaying the way Chen Mo had laughed. Actually laughed, not the tight, performative laugh she'd expected from her sister's rival. When she'd tripped over the extension cord bringing up his dinner tray, she'd built an entire personality for him out of her sister's complaints. Arrogant, cold, calculating. The reality kept refusing to cooperate. He was sharper than she expected, funnier than she wanted, and infuriatingly easy to talk to, which was the one outcome her plan had never once accounted for. She closed the laptop and told herself, very firmly, that this feeling in her chest was adrenaline from the kidnapping. It was not adrenaline. She knew it was not adrenaline. She ignored that fact with the sheer force of will that had gotten her through 6 years of being called the difficult one, and decided just this once to let herself be wrong about something quietly, in private, where no one, especially not her sister, would ever find out. Day 3 started with an argument that had nothing to do with either of us and everything to do with us. I made an offhand comment about how her family's shipping contracts had crushed my father's business 3 years running, and instead of the fight I expected, Shinny actually agreed with me. "My father plays dirty," she said flatly, arranging files on the table that I wasn't supposed to see and definitely looked at anyway. "He always has." Rui pretends not to notice because she wants his approval. "I noticed a long time ago and decided I'd rather be difficult than complicit." "Is that why you're the difficult one?" Her head snapped up. "Who told you that?" "My father. He says it like a compliment, for what it's worth." Something in her face softened in a way I hadn't seen yet. Surprised, almost undone by the idea that her reputation had traveled somewhere she didn't expect it to land gently. That afternoon, a complication I hadn't anticipated walked directly into the plan. Lu Cheng himself, apparently tipped off by someone at the port authority that a Zhou had been asking questions about his shell companies, showed up at the warehouse's ground floor entrance demanding to speak to Rui, who obviously wasn't there. Dahai handled him at the door, but not before I heard raised voices drifting up the stairwell, and Jinyi's spine went rigid in a way that told me exactly how much she'd been dreading this exact scenario. "He can't know you're here," she said to me, low and fast, already halfway to the stairs. "If he sees you tied up in a Zhou safe house, he'll spin it into something that makes my family look unhinged before I even get the evidence in front of Rui. So untie me. That defeats the entire purpose of the kidnapping. Zinni, there is a hedge fund heir currently threatening your family's guard downstairs. I don't think the purpose of the kidnapping is the priority right now." She stared at me for 1 full second, weighing it, and then, for the first time in 3 days, actually listened to me. She cut the zip ties herself, hands quick and sure despite the panic underneath, and shoved me toward a service closet with the specific instruction to not make a single sound. "I mean it, Chen Mo," which was the first time she'd used my full name without an insult attached to it. And I noticed, even folded awkwardly into a closet full of cleaning supplies, that I noticed. Lu Cheng never made it past the ground floor. Dahai, it turned out, was considerably more intimidating than his silence suggested, and Lu Cheng left after a tense 5 minutes with nothing but a vague threat about Rui hearing about this that everyone in the building understood to be empty bluster. But the incident did something to Jinyi, cracked the confidence out of her scheme, and replaced it with something more urgent. "We need to move faster," she said, pulling me out of the closet once the coast was clear, close enough that I could see the fine tremor still in her hands. "If he gets to Rui before I do, he'll twist this into a story where I'm the villain and he's the victim, and she'll believe him, because that's what he does. Then let's move faster." "We? You said we first. I'm just agreeing." That was the day her plan actually started working. Just not the way she'd drawn it up on her little whiteboard of Operation Make Rui Jealous. Zhou Rui found out that same night. Of course she found out. Shinyi wasn't nearly as subtle as she thought, and one of the warehouse guards had a big mouth and an even bigger gambling debt, and Lu Cheng's visit hadn't exactly stayed quiet either. Rui showed up at nearly midnight, storming into the loft in a coat that probably cost more than the building, and the first thing she said was not what either of us expected. "Zinni, what is wrong with you?" Not "let him go," not "how could you," just pure, exhausted disbelief, like her sister had done something merely embarrassing rather than criminal. I sat there, technically untied, but sitting back in the chair out of habit, watching my supposed nemesis argue with her sister in rapid, furious Mandarin, and thought, this is, genuinely, the strangest week of my entire life. "You could have just told me you didn't like Lu Cheng," Rui snapped. "I did tell you, 6 times. You didn't listen because you're in love with the idea of him, not the actual person, and I needed you to actually look. So your solution was to kidnap my rival." "He's not just your rival," Shinyi muttered. And this was the part where I stopped breathing a little, because I realized she hadn't meant for that to slip out. Rui's eyes flicked to me, then back to her sister, something sharpening in her expression. "Sinyi, it's not what you think. You've been feeding him for 3 days, you changed the sheets in the guest loft, you never change sheets for anyone, you make the staff do it. That's completely irrelevant. You made him noodles. You never make anyone noodles. You made me instant ramen for my birthday because you didn't have time. Oh my god, that was one time. And Lu Cheng came here today, and instead of panicking about the actual kidnapping charge you're currently exposed to, you hid him in a closet like this is a sitcom. I raised a hand from inside the argument's blast radius. For the record, the closet was my idea. Well, her idea. I just complied. Both sisters turned to look at me at the exact same moment with the exact same expression, and it was, briefly, the most terrifying thing that had happened to me all week, kidnapping included. I decided at that point that the smartest thing I could do was stay very, very quiet and let two Zhou sisters have the most revealing conversation of their lives while I watched like it was the season finale of a show I hadn't realized I was invested in. Rui eventually turned to the files stacked on the table, the real ones, the ones proving Lu Cheng's family had been quietly buying up shell companies with routes into the exact ports my father and old man Zhou had been fighting over for years. Her face went from furious to pale to something colder and more calculating in about 30 seconds flat. That's when I understood exactly why my father was terrified of this family. It wasn't old man Zhou, it was his daughters. She flipped through page after page in silence, and I watched 6 years of composed, untouchable Zhou Rui slowly crack open in real time, the same way Xin Yi's mask had been cracking all week without either sister noticing the pattern they shared. How long have you had these? Rui finally asked. 3 weeks. I tried to show you twice. You didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear it from you. Rui's voice was quieter now. You've hated everyone I've ever dated. I haven't hated everyone. I hated the ones who were using you. This one happened to also be trying to steal our family's shipping routes, which frankly should have been the headline, not the fact that I don't approve of your taste in men. Rui closed the folder. Something had settled behind her eyes. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the specific exhaustion of someone recalculating an entire relationship in the space of 5 minutes. I'll deal with Lu Cheng, Rui said finally, voice flat. Then she turned to me. You. I should hate that my sister used you like this. You should, I agreed. I'm a person, not a prop. But, she continued, ignoring me completely, given that you've clearly survived 4 days of my sister's cooking and have not once tried to actually escape despite multiple obvious opportunities. She glanced pointedly at the window I definitely could have climbed out of on day 1. I'm going to assume you're either an idiot or you like her. I didn't answer fast enough. That was answer enough. Rui sighed the exact particular sigh of an older sister who has just realized her carefully ordered universe has developed an extremely inconvenient wrinkle. Untie him, she told Jinyi, apparently not having noticed the ties had already come off hours earlier. Properly this time. And somebody needs to explain to our father why there's a Chen sitting in our safe house looking suspiciously comfortable. Jinyi held up her empty hands, already untied. Rui's expression flattened into something that suggested she had questions she didn't currently have the energy to ask, and instead just pinched the bridge of her nose and walked out to presumably go start destroying Lu Cheng's entire financial existence. The loft went quiet. I rubbed my wrists out of habit, even though there was nothing left to rub against, and looked at Zinni, really looked at her, past the scheme, past the absurdity of the entire situation. So, I said, did it work? Did what work? The plan. Making your sister jealous. Zinni glanced toward the doorway where Rui had just left, then back at me. I think, she said slowly, it worked, just not on the sister I was trying to make jealous. I raised an eyebrow. Meaning? Meaning I spent 4 days telling myself this was strategy, she said. And there it was, the crack finally showing all the way through. And somewhere around day 2, I stopped being able to tell the difference between the plan and just wanting an excuse to keep you here. I should have said something smooth. I had 4 days to prepare something smooth. Instead, what came out was, you could have just asked me to dinner. Less rope involved. She threw a napkin at my face. It was, all things considered, the most romantic gesture anyone has ever aimed at my head. We stayed up talking until nearly dawn that night. Not about her sister, not about Lu Cheng, not about shipping contracts or family rivalries. Small things. She told me she'd wanted to study architecture instead of joining the family business, and gave it up when her father needed someone sharp enough to negotiate and cold enough not to flinch. I told her I'd wanted to do the exact opposite. Leave the company entirely, and gave it up for reasons that sounded, when I said them out loud to her, embarrassingly similar to hers. We're not that different, she said, somewhere around 4 in the morning, curled up on the opposite end of the sofa with a blanket she'd brought up for the room, not for you, which fooled neither of us. We're rival siblings who got forced into a fake kidnapping scheme and started actually liking each other. I'd say we're exactly that different. Shut up, she said, without any real heat in it, and fell asleep before I could answer. I didn't sleep. I sat there in the dim light watching the sun come up over a city skyline I'd looked at 1,000 times from 100 different boardrooms, and thought about how strange it was that the most honest 4 days of my life had started with a sack over my head. Here's where it should have ended. Rivals, siblings, forced proximity, reluctant feelings blooming into something real, roll credits. Except our families were never going to let it be that simple. 2 days later, old man Zhou found out his daughter had kidnapped the son of his biggest business rival, and instead of the explosion I expected, he did something worse. He invited my father to dinner. Word moved fast in circles like ours. By the time I was finally allowed to go home and shower and put on clothes that hadn't been slept in for 4 days, both fathers already knew the broad strokes. A kidnapping, a jealousy scheme, a stack of financial records that had somehow ended up dismantling a hedge fund heir's entire southern port play. What neither father knew, yet, was the part where their children had spent 4 days falling for each other in a warehouse loft over instant noodles and bad piano scales. My father sat me down before the dinner, more serious than I'd seen him in years. Chen Mo, is there something about this Zhou business you'd like to explain to me before I walk into that room? I thought about lying. I decided given the week I'd just had that lying seemed like a waste of the very limited energy I had left. It's complicated. Everything with that family is complicated. That's not an answer. Then no, there's nothing to explain. I paused. Yet, he gave me a long look that suggested he understood far more than I'd said, which, given that he'd built an entire logistics empire on reading people better than they read themselves, should not have surprised me. The dinner was held at the Zhou estate, in a dining room designed specifically to remind guests exactly how much money was in the room with them. Old man Zhou sat at the head of the table looking entirely too pleased with himself for a man whose daughter had recently committed a felony. My father sat across from him, wearing the particular polite tension of a man who has spent a decade being outmaneuvered by the person currently smiling at him. Rui sat composed and unreadable, having apparently already made whatever peace she needed to make with the week's events. And Xinyi sat directly across from me, refusing to look up from her plate, which told me she'd rehearsed at least 4 different ways this dinner could go badly, and hadn't landed on one where it went well. My father walked into that dinner expecting a hostile negotiation over shipping contracts. What he got instead was old man Zhou sliding a folder across the table containing every piece of evidence about Lu Cheng's shell companies, effectively handing my father's company a way to undercut the exact deal that had been stolen from him years ago, with one condition attached. That condition was currently sitting 3 seats down from me, refusing to make eye contact, wearing an expression that suggested she would rather be kidnapped again than sit through whatever her father was about to say. Consider it a merger proposal, old man Zhou said. And the way both our fathers smiled at each other made my stomach drop somewhere around my shoes. A merger, my father repeated in the careful tone of a man deciding whether to be offended or delighted. Our shipping routes complement each other better than they compete, old man Zhou said smoothly. And it seems our children have already begun the negotiations without us. Rui, seated beside her father with the particular composure of someone who has already had this exact conversation privately and lost, said nothing. She just glanced at her sister with an expression that was somewhere between exasperated and unmistakably fond, the look of someone who'd spent a week furious at a scheme that had somehow impossibly worked out for everyone except the person who'd planned it. I'd like to point out, Xinyi said suddenly, finally looking up, color rising in her face, that a business merger is not a proportional response to a kidnapping that I fully intend to still be embarrassed about for the rest of my life. Noted, her father said, entirely unbothered, and poured himself more wine. Zhou Xinyi finally looked at me from across the table. 4 days ago, she'd zip-tied me to a chair to make her sister jealous. Now our fathers were negotiating something that sounded suspiciously like a business alliance dressed up as a marriage proposal, and neither of us had said a single word about what actually happened between us in that warehouse loft. Don't, she mouthed at me across the table. I smiled anyway. Actually, I said, loud enough for both fathers to hear, I think I'd like to hear more about this merger. The table went very quiet. My father raised an eyebrow at me, the specific eyebrow that meant we would be discussing this at length later, and old man Zhou looked, for the first time all evening, genuinely delighted rather than merely satisfied. The look on Xinyi's face, somewhere between betrayal and something that might have been relief, was the last thing I saw before the screen cut to black. To be continued.